The last letter from Okinawa. The rain had been relentless for days, turning the earth into thick, sucking mud that swallowed boots and made every step feel like wading through molasses. The wind carried the stench of death, rotting bodies, gunpowder, and the damp mildew of abandoned bunkers. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the ridges where the enemy lurked like ghosts, artillery shells burst, their thunder rolling over the hills like a god's cruel laughter. Sitting in a shallow foxhole, Sergeant Sam Barnes wiped a grimy hand across his face, smearing dirt and sweat into the already stained skin. His fingers trembled as he reached for the crumpled piece of paper in his breast pocket. A letter. Maybe the last one. "Dear Ma and Pa," he began, the pencil scratching against the damp page. "I don't know if this letter will make it to you, but I have to write it. Not for you, but for me. Maybe if I put these words on paper, they won't haunt me as much when I close my eyes." He paused, glancing up at the gray sky, where the heavy clouds moved sluggishly like tired soldiers. Around him, the jungle whispered with the eerie sounds of an unseen enemy, branches cracking, leaves rustling, distant murmurs in a language he did not understand but had come to fear. "You wouldn't recognize me now. I barely recognize myself. I came here as your son, the boy who used to fix Pa's truck and sneak Ma's apple pie before dinner. But war doesn't let you stay who you were. It strips you down, burns away everything soft, and leaves only the pieces that know how to survive. I've done things here that I don't think God can forgive. And yet I'll do them again tomorrow, and the next day, if it means seeing another sunrise." The wind picked up, carrying the distant echo of gunfire. Sam flinched instinctively. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white, before he forced himself to relax. Just another skirmish, another exchange of bullets in this hell that never seemed to end. "We landed on this island weeks ago. They told us it would be tough, but nothing prepares you for this. The Japs fight like devils, like they don't care about dying. Maybe they don't. We push forward, they pull back, then they hit us when we least expect it. We take a hill, they take it back. Every night, they sneak into our lines, crawling through the mud like ghosts. Sometimes, I wake up to find a guy next to me with his throat slit. Sometimes, I don't wake up at all, and I wonder if that's better." He stopped, listening to the heavy breathing of the men around him. Private Donnelly, a kid from Brooklyn with a sharp tongue and a nervous twitch, sat hunched over, rocking slightly as he muttered under his breath. McAllister, their radio man, clutched his rifle like it was the only thing tethering him to this world. Across from them, Corporal Jackson was staring blankly at nothing, his eyes hollow, his mind somewhere far from this island. "I saw something yesterday that I can't shake. We took a bunker, cleared it out, thought it was empty. But there was a woman inside. A Japanese woman, barely older than my sister. She had a baby with her. I don't know why she was there, maybe hiding, maybe hoping we wouldn't find her. But when she saw us, she didn't scream. She just looked at us. Then she took that baby and jumped. Just like that. No hesitation. Like she'd rather die than be in our hands. And I don't know what scares me more, that she did it or that I understand why." His hand shook as he folded the letter, slipping it back into his pocket. He would finish it later. If there was a later. The rain had finally stopped, but the island still smelled of decay. The mud had turned to sludge, sticky and thick, clinging to boots, uniforms, and the dead alike. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a mortar round exploded, shaking the ground like a giant's fist. Sam Barnes barely flinched. He had gotten used to it. He pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket, smoothing it out on his knee. The paper was damp, the pencil marks smudged, but the words were still there, his words, his last tether to a world that felt a million miles away. "Mapa, I don't know what day it is anymore. Maybe a week has passed since I started this letter, maybe just a few hours. Time doesn't move right here. Days stretch like years, but when I close my eyes, it's like everything happens at once. I see home. I see the war. I see faces, some I knew, some I killed. And I don't know which haunt me more." A cough broke the silence beside him. Donnelly. The kid looked worse than before, his hands trembling as he fumbled with a cigarette. His face was pale, too pale, and his eyes darted around like he expected death to crawl out of the mud at any second. Maybe he wasn't wrong. We lost another one today. Private Ellis. He was from Kansas. Used to talk about his girl back home like she was an angel walking the earth. Said he was going to marry her the second he got back. I hope she never finds out how he died. We were moving up a hill under heavy fire, and a Jap popped out of a tunnel right behind us. None of us even saw him. 1 second, Ellis was there. The next, his head was gone. Just gone. Like someone blew out a candle. And you know what the worst part is? We didn't stop. We couldn't. We just kept moving, stepping over what was left of him, because that's what you do here. You keep moving, or you end up like him. He paused, glancing at Donnelly. The kid had finally gotten his cigarette lit, but his hand still shook. Sam looked away. There was nothing he could say that would make it better. Nothing made anything better anymore. We took another village this morning. Or what was left of it. The Japs don't leave anything behind but death. Sometimes it's their own. Sometimes it's ours. The buildings were burnt out. The streets littered with bodies. Some in uniform, some not. There were women, children. We're told not to think about them. Told to keep moving. But how do you not think about them when their eyes follow you? When the blood sticks to your boots? When you hear the flies buzzing before you even see what they're feasting on? The sound of a plane roared overhead, followed by the distant whine of a dive bomber. Sam clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe. We found something in one of the huts. A soldier, barely older than Donnelly, still clutching his rifle like he could use it. His uniform was soaked in blood, his face twisted in pain. He was already gone, but next to him, in his pocket, was a letter. Just like mine, just like this one. It was written in Japanese, but I didn't need to read it to know what it said. It was a goodbye, promise, maybe even a prayer. And I wondered, when he wrote it, did he know he wouldn't make it? Did he feel it in his bones the way I feel it now? He folded the letter again, pressing it against his chest. He didn't finish it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The war wasn't over, and neither was he. But for how much longer, he didn't know. The jungle never slept. Even when the gunfire died down, even when the mortars stopped screaming, the island itself seemed to breathe, whispers in the trees, the rustling of unseen creatures, the distant murmur of men too exhausted to speak aloud. Sam Barnes sat in the mud, his back against the splintered remains of a palm tree, and listened to the silence that wasn't really silence at all. His fingers found the letter again, the paper damp and worn from too many rereads. The words were smudged in places where the rain, or maybe his own sweat, had soaked through. He hadn't added to it in days. Maybe because there was nothing left to say. Maybe because there was too much. Mapa, I should have died today. I don't know why I didn't. He stared at the sentence, the letters pressing into the page like scars. His hands tightened into fists before he forced himself to relax. No sense wasting energy on anger. Not when there wasn't enough to go around. They sent us up a ridge this morning. Said we had to take it, hold it, dig in. Like it was just another hill on just another island in just another war. But it wasn't just another hill. It was a goddamn nightmare. The Japs were waiting for us, dug in deep, tunnels winding through the rock like veins. We didn't see them, didn't hear them, not until we were already in their sights. Then hell opened up. Sam could still hear the screams, still smell the burning flesh. The first wave of men had been cut down before they even knew where the fire was coming from. Machine guns tore through them like paper. Mortars blasted bodies into the air like ragdolls. He had seen men, good men, reduced to nothing but broken limbs and red mist. And yet, somehow, he had kept moving, kept fighting. McAllister took one to the gut. He didn't die right away. Just lay there, clutching at his stomach like he was trying to hold himself together. I wanted to help him, but there was nothing to help. Nothing to save. He knew it too. He looked at me, eyes wide, and whispered something. I don't know what. Maybe a name. Maybe a prayer. Then he was gone. Sam swallowed, his throat dry as sandpaper. He closed his eyes for a moment, but that only made it worse. The images burned against his eyelids, seared into his mind like a brand. We took the ridge, or what was left of it. I don't know if it was worth it. Maybe tomorrow they'll take it back, and we'll have to do it all over again. But tonight we hold it. Tonight I sit in the mud with Donnelly, who won't stop shaking, and Jackson, who hasn't said a word in hours, and I wonder if this is the last night I'll ever see. He let out a slow breath, staring at the sky. The stars were out, cold and distant, untouched by the blood and fire below. He used to love the stars. He used to lay in the back of Pa's truck on summer nights and count them until he lost track. Now they just felt like reminders of how small he was, how little any of this mattered to the universe. I don't know how to come back from this, if I even get the chance. I try to remember home, but it feels like a dream I had a long time ago. I don't remember the smell of Ma's cooking or the sound of Pa's laugh. I don't remember what it feels like to be warm or clean or safe. I don't remember what it's like to not be afraid. His hand trembled as he folded the letter. He didn't want to finish it. Not yet. Not until he knew if he would have another night to write. Dawn came slow, bleeding through the mist like a dying thing. The jungle, thick with smoke and ghosts, stirred with the uneasy quiet that only came after too much killing. Sam Barnes sat in the mud, his rifle across his lap, and tried to remember what morning was supposed to feel like. Back home, it meant the smell of Ma's coffee, the sound of Pa whistling on the porch, the sun warming the earth. Here, it was just another day to survive. He pulled the letter from his pocket. The paper was nearly falling apart now, soft and fragile between his fingers. He had read it so many times he could see the words even when he closed his eyes. But he still hadn't finished it. Maybe he was afraid to. Pa, I think I understand now. Why they fight the way they do. Why they don't surrender. It's not just about dying for their emperor. It's about not letting go of something bigger than themselves. Home, honor, whatever you want to call it. I used to think it was madness. Now, I wonder if it's the only thing keeping any of us going. Donnelly was gone, taken in the night. Not by a bullet, not by a mortar, but by something worse. Fear. He had just walked away, left his rifle behind, left everything, and disappeared into the jungle. Sam had seen it happen before. Men breaking, unraveling from the inside until there was nothing left to hold them together. Maybe he was still out there, wandering the trees. Maybe he had walked straight into enemy hands. Maybe he had just kept walking until the island swallowed him whole. No one talked about it. No one even looked at the empty space where he had been. I keep thinking about that Jap soldier. The one whose letter I found. I don't know his name. I don't know who he was writing to. Maybe his ma. Maybe his girl. Maybe his son. But he wrote it knowing he wouldn't see them again. He wrote it because some things have to be said even if no one ever reads them. I wonder if he ever finished it. Or if he was like me, holding on to something that felt like a lifeline. A shell whistled overhead, landing somewhere in the valley below. The ground shook, but Sam barely felt it anymore. The war was a storm, endless and unforgiving, but he had stopped looking for shelter. They say this will be the last battle. That after this island, after Okinawa, it'll be over. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if any of us do. But if I make it out of this, I don't think I'll ever leave this place. Not really. I think part of me will always be here, in the mud, in the smoke, in the silence between gunfire. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to tell you about it. Not in the way I should. Not in the way you deserve. Sam closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the jungle wash over him. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But his letter was. He folded it carefully, tucking it back into his pocket, and wondered if anyone would ever read it. The rain returned with the evening, rolling in slow and heavy, drowning the jungle in a ceaseless downpour. It soaked into the mud, the trenches, the hollowed-out corpses left behind in no man's land. The island breathed in the water like a dying thing gasping for air, and somewhere beyond the ridgeline, the war dragged on. Sam Barnes sat hunched beneath the shattered remains of a wooden shelter, his fingers curled around the letter that had become more of a relic than a message. The paper was nearly pulp now, softened by rain, by sweat, by the weight of too many words left unsaid. He didn't read it anymore. He didn't need to. It was carved into his mind, etched in a place deeper than memory. Mapa, I stopped waiting for it to end. It's not that I don't believe in home anymore. It's that I don't know if I belong to it. The realization had settled into him days ago, maybe weeks, maybe longer. The war had a way of twisting time, stretching it out until days felt like lifetimes, folding it in until lifetimes felt like seconds. He had seen too much, done too much. The man who had boarded that transport ship what felt like 100 years ago, right sure of his place in the world, was long gone. and whoever was left in his skin wasn't sure where he was supposed to go. A rustling in the brush made him tense, his grip tightening on his rifle. But it wasn't the enemy. It was Jackson, slinking back into the shelter, his face hollow and drawn. His uniform was dark with rain, his boots caked in filth. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside Sam, his breathing slow, careful. After a long moment, he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, edges curled and stained. A letter. Sam didn't ask who it was for. He just nodded. I wonder if they'll even recognize me when I get back. If I get back, I wonder if I'll recognize myself. I don't know how to talk about this. About the sound a man makes when a bullet finds him. About what it's like to dig a trench in the middle of the night, knowing it might be your grave. About the way the air tastes after an explosion, thick with metal and blood and something else you don't have a name for. Lightning flashed somewhere in the distance, casting brief, jagged shadows across the jungle. The rain blurred everything, turned the world into something ghostly and unreal. For a moment, Sam wondered if they were already dead, if this was some kind of waiting room between hell and whatever came after. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a stub of a pencil. The wood was swollen from the damp, the tip worn down almost to nothing. Still, he pressed it to the page, forcing himself to keep writing. I used to think the worst part of war was the dying. It's not. It's the surviving. It's knowing that not all of us are getting out, and trying to figure out why I'm still here when better men aren't. It's carrying their faces with me, hearing their voices in the quiet, seeing them in my dreams. It's wondering if I'll ever be able to leave them behind. Or if I even want to. Jackson let out a slow breath beside him, rubbing a thumb over his own letter like a prayer. He didn't look up, didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Sam's fingers trembled as he folded his letter one last time. The war wasn't over. But maybe somehow someday he would be.